This week, the seemingly impossible happened. If you checked the Steam stats for Total War games, for the first time in years, a Warhammer title was not topping the charts. Since the disappointing release of Warhammer 3, there has been a mass exodus, not just away from that game, but also from its previous entry, Warhammer 2. And while many Warhammer fans have moved on, historical fans seem to have largely returned to their roots. You need only look at the recent post on Reddit to see a renaissance of the beloved historical titles, which no doubt was helped by the Creative Assembly's sale of historical games over the last weekend. But it does beg the question, with both Warhammer and historical players returning to the older games, why are we not seeing any kind of support for them? If you looked at my proposed roadmap for potential releases over the next year, which has really been shot to hell since, you'll notice that there's no actual historical titles that have been slated for release. Not only that, none have even been announced. Yet this is the bread and butter that the company was built on. Future DLC support for Total War 3 Kingdoms was unceremoniously dropped last year in what can only be described as one of the most tone-deaf videos ever recorded by a gaming company. Several of you messaged me asking me to do anything I could to try and convince the Creative Assembly to change their minds. To put it bluntly, I asked a couple questions and the answers weren't exactly revealing. In fact, all the resources of the Creative Assembly seem to be geared towards Warhammer 3, and with potential sales for 3 Kingdoms DLCs and the player base waning, there just wasn't a lot of momentum to make that happen. Well, the wind has changed. Warhammer 3's launch can only be described as disastrous, and the entire company has been put into a backspin. And so I think it's time for them to sit down and really reevaluate their stance on 3 Kingdoms. Nobody really wants 3 Kingdoms 2 in 3 years. They want the DLC they were promised for 3 Kingdoms. They want a games as a service model, with small updates and continued support for years to come. And if the Creative Assembly is too stuck in the past to know the difference, then it does not bode well for the future of the company. Which is all to say, if you're a historical player that's never tried Total War 3 Kingdoms, then you totally should. But if you're a fantasy player, I honestly don't know. So many of the complaints about the historical games is they lack diversity. Well, I suppose compared to lizard men fighting zombies and giant rats and elves, yeah, it does. But that particular opinion is one that grates on every historical nerve that I have. If you say that someone from Scotland and Yorkshire are the same, you're going to have a fight on your hands, and they're less than 100 miles apart. The Total War community itself is very divided between the fantasy and historical camps. You need only look at the various Reddits and subreddits and offshoots to see just how much of an impact it has made. And especially when 3 Kingdoms support was dropped, so many comments were basically, oh, well, they didn't promise you anything here. You know, what did you expect? Yeah, except it's a pattern of behavior. Rome 2 had DLCs for years after its release, including some even after the release of Attila. Warhammer 1 and 2 had DLC cycles for 3-4 years after them, and so it was expected that that would be the same for this game. And yet the cycle of support for 3 Kingdoms ended not on a triumph, but a whimper. But it's not as if its player base ever disappeared. Over the last year, it's consistently had between 9,000 and 12,000 players on a daily basis. So again, it begs the question, why was support for the game dropped? And the only reasonable conclusion that I can come to is that though they may claim there are separate historical and fantasy teams, clearly one of them has a hell of a lot more support than the other. And the thing is, it's not like a DLC for a historical game requires that many people to make. For perspective, a chapter pack for 3 Kingdoms is just someone going in, editing start pos, and then making sure to add 1 or 2 new people, and then 1 or 2 new units, and 1 or 2 buildings. Then they script out a mechanic using Lua that may already be based on existing script. You can see the amazing mods that have been made for games like Warhammer in a matter of a week, and yet these things supposedly take months to create? It doesn't make any kind of logical sense that a company of the size of Creative Assembly with 800 employees and 2 studios couldn't make another DLC for 3 Kingdoms. Someone did the math and said, hey, you know what? Our time is better spent making DLCs for Warhammer, or a brand new title. Or maybe it really does just take 3 months to make these because there are so many managers and mid-level people that have to put their stamp of approval onto one of these that they just can't get done. Regardless, it's titles like Three Kingdoms that have gotten Total War through the lean times in the past. And now, guess what? People have stopped playing, yet the core fan base has gone back to what they love. So how about, instead of trying to always pursue the something new, the something flashy, and appeal to that fantasy base with games like Troy and the superhero units of Three Kingdoms that a lot of people did have some issues with, you instead try and appeal back to that core demographic again. Make the Northern Lords DLC. Make the Nomad Lords DLC. Bring in Korea because it's already on the map. And people bought the game expecting those things to happen. Sound familiar? And perhaps a company shouldn't just say, well, best of luck guys, we'll see you sometime in August or September. Until then, off. So I summon you to fulfill your oath. Break off a team from whatever unannounced BS project that we're supposed to hype next and make something for what people are playing and excited about right now. Make a token gesture to your fan base that says, hey, guess what? We're not so completely out of touch with you that we can't see the way the wind is blowing. Bring up the fact that Rome 2 had years of support. Point out how much support Warhammer had. Make sure to bring up how many people are still playing Three Kingdoms. Every single chance you get. Inundate YouTubers with comments. Make sure to leave a daily reminder on the Reddit. And you know what? Surprise, the company will probably have to respond to you at that point. And before one of you bothers to comment with, oh man, you entitled gamers, hey man, this is a company we're buying a product from. This is a company many of us have supported for years. And if the people at the top cannot steer it in a direction that the rest of the players are interested in, then maybe it's our job to remind them. Because guess what? There is a give and take to all of this. And I'm tired of being sold something that was developed in the dark and then told, hey, this is exactly what you wanted the entire time without any input on it. For example, the 8 Princes DLC, which managed to cut the Three Kingdoms game off at the knees as soon as it launched. There used to be a time where a gaming company could just make promises and then not follow through with them, and people would forget on the next game. But clearly, that hasn't happened anymore. You only have to look at the player base to see that people remember what happened with Three Kingdoms. There is no trust that they'll get it right eventually. There is no belief that, oh, well, you know, they'll do the right thing. If you want to do the right thing, you go back and you fix Three Kingdoms the way you said you would. You finish patching the bugs that have been persistent for the last 3 years, and you give people the experience that they signed on for, instead of developing another sequel title to shove down their throats, regardless of how many bugs it fixes or how much it fixes the directional changes that you screwed up to begin with. You fixed the game you already got out. And you know what? That's one thing I will give a Total War Saga Troy credit for. Theo Sophia pitched a bad game. It was not a good idea, yet they ran with it anyway. But in the end, they gave us a Mythos DLC. And so you had the historical, and you had the fantasy, then you had the one in the middle that was a half version that nobody played. And my channel in particular gave that company some serious shit for their decisions. Yet I will defend them because of this. Somebody had to go to bat for the Mythos DLC. Somebody had to go and look and say, you know what? We screwed up. We need to go back and do this right. And I respect that. And it's time someone does the same thing for Total War Three Kingdoms.